Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Part 1, Section 7, reads like this. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Part 1, Section 7. The United States Constitution, Amendment 5. No person shall be deprived of life. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And then the text we're going to look at the end of this message. I'm not going to start talking about it right now. It's a striking text to me. Job 31, 13 to 15. Job speaks and he says, if I have rejected the cause of my manservant or my maidservant, when they brought a complaint against me, what then shall I do when God rises up? When he makes inquiry, what shall I answer him? Did not he who made me in the womb make him? And did not one, God, fashion us, both me and my servants, in the womb? I'm going to talk about that verse. It's so relevant to the point I want to make about the changing face in the battle for life. And there is a different face. You need to know this. The argument has shifted. Most people link the abortion issue. You guys have that video ready? Good. In our modern times with what has been known as the U.S. Supreme Court's now famous Roe versus Wade decision. And I had a little video. I want you to see this just before I continue with the message.
Most of you won't recognize me or my real name. It's Norma McCorvey. I'm also known as Jane Roe, the plaintiff in the Supreme Court case, Roe versus Wade, which legalized abortion in America and changed our nation in an unprecedented way. Back in 1973, I was a very confused 21-year-old with one child and facing an unplanned pregnancy. At the time, I fought to obtain a legal abortion, but the truth be told, I have 3 daughters and have never had an abortion. However, upon knowing God, I realized that my case, which legalized abortion on demand, was the biggest mistake of my life. You see, abortion has eliminated 50 million innocent babies in the U.S. alone since 1973. Abortion scars an untold number of post-abortive mothers, fathers, and families too. You read about me in history books, but now I'm dedicated to spreading the truth about preserving the dignity of all human life, from natural conception to natural death.
Roe versus Wade. Since that tragic decision on January 22nd in 1973, conservative estimates are between 50, as she said, and 52, depending on what stats you use. Between 50 and 52 million babies have been killed in the U.S. alone. Canadian totals are much harder to get. It's estimated that in the same period, around 3 million preborn children have been killed in Canada. A much less known statistic. Now, drink this one in. Staggeringly, in Asia, in the last 3 decades, over 163 million baby girls have been killed in abortion. I said 163 million, which, to put it in perspective, that is more than the entire female population of the United States of America. More than the entire female population of the United States has been killed in Asia. Baby girls. in the last 30 years. That's what happens when choice is enthroned. Feminists are put in the awkward position of being in favor of an act that is monstrously sexist in most of the world's population. Monstrously sexist. And defended by feminists. The way it works out in the U.S. is demographically the vast majority of abortions take place on African American women and babies. So it's sexist, and it's racist, and it's violent. Roe versus Wade. More people talk about that decision than actually know what was decided. And so I'm just laying some groundwork here. I'd like to take just a minute. It's not typical Sunday morning stuff, I know, but I want to go over the rulings of the Roe versus Wade decision. And here's what it ruled. A, that no state may make laws regulating abortion during the first 3 months of pregnancy. No state may make laws regulating abortion during the first 3 months of pregnancy, except to provide that they be done by licensed physicians. B, that laws regulating abortion between the 3rd month and the time of viability, which usually is about 6 months. Laws regulating abortion between the 3rd month and 6 months are constitutional only. That's the important word. Only insofar as they are aimed at safeguarding the health of mothers, so the baby doesn't enter into the picture. C, this is all tied up in Roe versus Wade, that laws relating to the time of viability, 6 months, until the end of pregnancy. Okay, so this is from 6 months to 9 months. That's the stretch we're talking about here. Okay? Roe versus Wade says you can't make any laws preventing abortions from 6 months to 9 months. This is to preserve the life or health of the mother. So 2 days before the baby is born. D, and this explains it, that the health of the mother includes all factors: physical, emotional, psychological, familial, could create family difficulties, and the woman's age, relevant to the well-being of the patient. That's the only way you can make laws. Now, in July 1976, the court extended its original decision to affirm 2 other things. So we're up to E, that abortions may be performed on minor daughters without the knowledge or consent of their parents. And F, that women, whether married or unmarried, may obtain abortions without the knowledge or consent of the baby's father. Now, please think about the cumulative effects of all those rulings when taken together. These laws, when you study them carefully, add them all up, put them all in a big snowball, they mean that abortion for the vast majority of the North American population is legal at any time before birth if the mother can give reason that either the pregnancy or the baby will be a burden or a stress on her well-being. Now, the staggering effect of these rulings is now the obvious evidence of history. Since that ruling, there have been, on average, 1.7 million preborn children killed every year. Let that number register. That's 4,658 deaths every single day of the year. Just in, I'm talking Canada, U.S., just North America. That's 194 abortions every hour of every day. While you are in this church service, 291 children will be killed in North America. That's happening every hour, every day you breathe, even while you're asleep. 291 preborn children are killed every hour, 24 hours a day, nonstop. Why are you doing this, Don? You're just trying to depress us? Let me tell you why I'm doing it. It's a conviction that I have. It relates to this issue and some others. It relates to abortion. It relates to praying for the lost. And here's the deal. You will never intercede for 1 hour for the abortion issue. You will never pray about it for 1 hour until you think about it for 1 hour. It's like praying for the lost. Most of us drum up a little thing about missions at the end of our prayer and bless the missionaries and reach all the lost in Jesus' name. You will never intercede for the lost for 60 minutes until you mourn for the lost for 60 minutes. It's in the mourning over something that fuel is born for intercession. The reason we don't pray for these things is we just don't think about them enough. Turn off the TV. There's some stuff that isn't funny. Turn off the sitcoms. Sit and weep for the lost, and you'll start praying for the lost. Do you understand what I'm saying? The reason the church, by and large, prays far less than it should about this issue is because we don't think about it. We're against it. But that's not the same as mourning it. I chose the title for this message carefully. I don't know if you've noticed it, but the debate on abortion has taken a noticeable turn in the last little while, at least in public debate. I'm not talking now about a woman may hear in a private counsel in an abortion clinic or hospital, but in public debate, there's not as much said anymore about the fetus in the womb of the mother not being a person. Very little is said about that anymore. It used to be the standing go-to argument for abortionists. It's not a person, it's an embryo. It's a little bit of protoplasm. And that's not done much anymore. It's not now the main point of the argument coming from the pro-choice camp. It's not used in public as much simply because there are too many compelling arguments calling that kind of defective thinking into account. Everybody knows that a preborn child is a human person. Or at the very least, this is not my view, but at the very least, everyone knows that a person is being formed in the womb. No human mother and father ever conceived and gave birth to an aardvark or a rhinoceros. Everybody knows it's a person. The people who say, don't worry, it's not a person, then the answer should be, well, then just leave it alone. What's the problem? If it's just part of the woman's body, like her appendix, well, here's the difference. Her appendix is never going to pop out one day and say, send me to college. I mean, we all know how ridiculous it is, right? Medically, the argument doesn't stand, and that's being recognized on all sides of the issue. There are simply too many factors that scream out against the inconsistency of trying to maintain that the baby in the womb of the mother is not a person. Let me just go over a couple of them, okay, quickly. Consider a couple of facts. One, it's striking to me that in Minnesota and a few other states in the U.S., not the case in Canada, but in Minnesota and a couple other states, there are still fetal homicide laws. I said fetal homicide laws on the books that make a person guilty of manslaughter or worse if he kills a baby while it's in the mother's womb. Unbelievably, though, there's a written exception for abortion. Now think about that just for a minute. The law stands on the books that if the fetus in the mother's womb is killed and it's not the mother's choice, then the person who does it stands trial for homicide. But if the baby is aborted, then there's no law that applies. And what else can that possibly mean? The baby in both cases is in the mother's womb. In one case, it's a punishable crime to kill it. In the other, it's not. What else can that mean except it's the mother's choice, not whether the baby is a person. That's the issue. What else can it possibly mean other than it's a crime to kill a baby in the womb without the mother's permission, but it's not a crime to kill the same baby with the mother's permission? Do you understand what I'm saying? It has nothing to do with whether that baby's a person or not. It's the choice of the mother. It's pro-choice. So clearly the personhood of the baby is not the issue here at all. The issue here is the right and the power of a mother's choice plus nothing else at all. In other words, there is no other factor, nothing in the essence of the unborn to determine its right to life. This is pure totalitarian rule. The rights of the strong determine the rights of the weak and the defenseless. And you think people would stand and say, you know what, we've been here before. We've been here before in human history, where the rights of the strong determine the rights of the defenseless and the weak. The Holocaust. Slavery. Every time in Canada, when it was Morgentaler, and in the States, when I hear Oprah, and I see these two people, and I just think, are you insane? Of all people. Don't you see where this goes? Where the choice of a certain group of people determines the rights of others? With the Jewish people in the Holocaust? With the blacks in the South and the slave movement? We've seen where this goes. Two, here's another reason why that argument about personhood doesn't stand. In countless hospitals all over America, with increasing benefit and effectiveness, legitimate life-saving medical procedures are being performed on babies still in the womb, while babies of the same age and same size and development are being killed in the same hospital just down the hall. Personhood isn't the issue. It's the choice of a mother that's the issue. So this shows that the difference lies not in the babies themselves, but in the wish of a mother or a doctor. There's virtually no debate of the comparative personhood of those two babies being treated in two totally different ways. They might be cousins. One is being saved, one is being killed. What else is it but the choice of a mother or a doctor? 3, we now have increasing number of cases where babies can live viably on their own outside the womb at 23 or 24 weeks. And yet the Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision says babies can be legally aborted at that very same age and even beyond that age if the mother decides she'll be distressed by the baby's live birth more than by its abortion. So clearly, in all such cases, the decision is based not on any definition of personhood, but on the rights and desires of the mother. For example, if the baby was actually born prematurely and survived, if the baby was actually born prematurely and survived, would the mother be legally allowed to strangle the baby because it was out of her womb? And most of us would say, well, no. That's an absurd question. But consider the reason for that negative response. We would say it's against the law to kill that little person in that hospital bed, and yet countless other babies exactly the same age and exactly the same size, perhaps the same sex and at the same stage of development, are being killed every year. In what meaningful sense can it intelligently be said that they're not all equally persons? 4. I'm trying to hurry, sorry. Those who argue that viability, that's the ability of the baby to live apart from the support and nourishment of the mother. Those who argue that viability determines the right to life of the baby, they know this isn't a valid definition of personhood that will stand up to any examination. What are we going to do with scores of thousands of people on respirators? Dialysis machines. Is personhood really to be defined by the source of nourishment and oxygen? Are these really not persons with meaning to their lives? Do they have no right to be protected from having others take their lives away? Every baby a wanted baby. What is... I almost use a Greek word that wouldn't be appropriate in the pulpit. How ridiculous. How ridiculous. Every baby a wanted baby. Somebody wants those babies. Ask people in the church who have tried adopting a baby. Every child a wanted child. And so many people just smile and think, isn't that nice? Well, I have news for you. There are unwanted 2-year-olds. There are unwanted 90-year-olds. What do you suggest we do with all these unwanted people? How ludicrous. Like, where are we going? 5. We know that relative size of the embryo in the womb of the mother is not a valid definition of personhood. It used to be used. It was such a common argument. People would point out just how tiny these aborted fetuses actually were. Look how small. We know that's a flimsy argument. We know this because the premature baby living outside the womb is so much smaller than a full-term baby. Have you ever seen one? Tiny little things. Who hasn't seen that photograph, the little baby in the hand? Some of them you can put inside a soup bowl. Premature baby is so much smaller than a full-term baby, but no one says the premature baby is not a person just because of that. And then, look how much smaller a baby is than a football player. Are we going to say that all babies don't qualify for personhood because, well, look how tiny they are compared to a halfback? Regular people are so much bigger than babies. Size doesn't define personhood. 6. We know that the development of the baby in the womb of the mother clearly points to the traits of personhood being present. I know you know this, but consider that by the time the tiny baby is only 8 weeks old, do you know that all of the organs of the body are present? The brain is functioning, the heart is pumping with a regular heartbeat. The liver is busy making blood cells, frequently a different blood type from the mother. Kidneys are already cleaning fluids. Those tiny fingers already have their own permanent, distinctive fingerprints, and yet the vast majority of abortions are performed much later than 8 weeks. I'm making all these points not because I don't think you already know most of them, but because I want to go back to my first statement in this message. Abortionists are becoming increasingly silent in their arguments against the personhood of the baby in the womb. Fetal surgery and care is developing at such a rapid pace that it isn't the Christian community, the medical community is tearing all those arguments apart. It's getting harder and harder and harder. It's like there are still people, you could find them, who try and tell you that the earth is flat. But just modern science makes it very hard to hold that position. The same is true with the idea that the fetus in the mother's womb isn't a person. We haven't even had to disarm that. It's just crumbled under the weight of where medical care is going. The argument of choice for abortionists is increasingly that the rights of the mother over her own body must be protected. And we will miss much of our opportunity to advance the cause of justice and life if we miss this important fact. Abortion is now an issue of conflicting rights. That's what it is. Abortion is an issue of conflicting rights. In the whole pro-choice movement, the whole argument is that the rights of the mother to choose take precedence over the rights of the baby to live. That's it. The rights of the mother to choose take precedence over the rights of the baby to live. The rights of the strong and the healthy and the vocal overrule the rights of the silent and the weak. And we simply have to see this as the key issue. Here's the law of the land today. A baby in the womb has rights to life if the mother wills it to have those rights. And the baby in the womb does not have rights to life if the mother does not will it to have rights. Bottom line. Period. And the difference is not found in the personhood of the baby. The difference is in the desire of the mother. And note the key premise here. This is the clearest example in the whole world of the person with power deciding to take the life of the person without power. Think about it. Is this not the very situation that civilization has continually resisted since government and laws came to be? Don't nations go to war, rightly or wrongly? I'm not debating that issue. Nations go to war to aid those who are said to be defenseless against the will of those with power to hurt and rape and abuse and destroy, and we go and we send aid and we help. Why? Because you can't just let the powerful do whatever they want to the powerless. There's no justice in that system. Isn't this why we have laws against rape? Am I free to make that choice simply because I'm bigger and stronger than a victim? And anybody with a brain says, well, no. Having the ability to do something doesn't give you the right to do it. It's a bad choice. No one's in favor of that choice. What about incest? What about child abuse? We all know that no one has the right to choose to do those things to those who just happen to be powerless to defend themselves. Every sane person knows that we must protect the powerless. And here's why. Because we live in a fallen world. Everyone knows you need policemen, laws, a justice system, some kind of punishment for criminals. Everyone knows that we must protect the powerless because those with power frequently make morally bad and selfish choices, and they must be stopped. We all know that's how this works. That's why we have laws against rape, incest, child abuse. We all know that a pro-choice position is moral insanity if the choice is a wicked choice or a violent choice committed against someone who is powerless to defend themselves. It's not about person, non-person. It is about the choice of the strong taking away the rights of the weak. Now, I want to show you why this is so wicked and sinful from a biblical perspective, not a philosophic one. And I go back to our opening text, Job. If you have your Bibles, we're 70% done. 73% maybe. Job chapter 31, verses 13, 14, and 15. If I have rejected the cause of my manservant or maidservant, those in more rough parlance would be slaves, his slaves. When they brought a complaint against me. So here's the situation. Job is the person and he's arguing now his righteousness. These people come with their counsel about all that Job's gone through, and Job's arguing for his righteousness. And he says, you know what, when my servants came with a complaint, you're not treating me fair, you didn't pay me for this, you're working us too hard, this is not a reasonable demand. When my servants came with complaints, I listened to them. I didn't have to. They're my servants. If I have rejected the cause of my manservant or my maidservant when they brought a complaint against me, what then shall I do when God rises up? When He makes inquiry? What shall I answer Him? Interestingly, there's the case that we process, the way we justify our actions, the way we process the choices we make and justify them, and then Job says there's another reckoning, the one that counts. The bottom line reckoning is God. And Job recognizes there's these two sides. I can make this decision, I can make that decision, and I can do so with impunity because they're just my slaves. I can do whatever I want, except I have to answer to God. So I could have twisted up whatever standards of judgment and rightness and wrongness. I could have done whatever I wanted. After all, they're just slaves and I'm the master. What kept me from doing that is I have my mind toward the fact that I have to answer to God. God has an absolute unbending standard, Job says. And that's the one that counts. Why does it count? Why does God's concept of justice, his assessment, why does that matter? Well, did not He who made me in the womb, this is what he's talking about now, in the womb, before birth, did not He who made me make him? Did not one fashion us in the womb? It's a fascinating text. Until very recently, I'd never used this in any teaching on abortion, and I'm not sure why. Job makes a great argument that goes far beyond even some of the classic texts that we usually use. Fearfully and wonderfully made, knit together in my mother's womb, those texts. So Job begins, my first thought on this verse, Job begins by making the point that he has not carelessly rejected any of the advice and complaints of his servants, even though in that culture he would have been totally justified in doing so. A master doesn't have to listen to slaves, even if they're right. A master owns the slaves in that culture. And so servants were frequently treated merely as chattel, simply the property of their owners with no voice or rights of their own. We've seen this kind of treatment in many periods of history. It still exists in some parts of the world. But with God's help, pretty much all sane people in our land have come to see the wickedness of such cruelty and exploitation. But in Job's day, and this is the point, In Job's day, no one would have been considered wicked or immortal from totally ignoring the appeal of servants. It was done all the time. The people with the authority and the people with the power made the decisions, and those just were the right decisions because nobody would argue. Secondly, Job says he would be without excuse if he didn't treat his slaves as his equals. And all of us just say, good for you, Job. What a tolerant, broad-minded person, way ahead of your day. But it has nothing to do with tolerance, or him being liberal-minded, or he being liberal-minded. Both Christians and atheists know instinctively that Job is to be commended for his loving heart. We all know in the depths of our being that this is the way the world ought, and there's that tricky word, this is the way the world ought to be. Here's what everyone knows. It's simply wrong to abuse the weak simply because we have the power or because we have the acceptance of the prevailing culture to do so. Three, the foundation of Job's righteous treatment of his slaves is not based on the fact that he, Job, is a free man while his servants are not. Job says the issue of their worth, of dignity and fairness, he says, it goes back to before any of us was born. Did not he who made me in the womb make him? And the same one, the same God, fashion us in the womb. And when Job takes us back to the hand of God in forming both himself and his slaves in the womb, he's saying that bears directly on the abortion issue today. Job is saying the personhood and worth of human beings isn't dependent on their physical mothers. To Job, it was totally irrelevant that his mother was probably free and wealthy, and the slave's mother was probably a bondwoman. Why doesn't that matter to Job? Because mothers and fathers are not the establishers of personhood. God is the establisher of personhood. If you didn't know basic biology, mothers contribute an impersonal egg, fathers contribute an impersonal sperm. God creates persons out of that. Job says, the fact that I have the power and the acceptance of society and culture to treat these people however I want, that doesn't give me the right. Why not, Job? Because God made us both in the womb. It goes back to before our birth. God creates persons. Culture doesn't. Wealth doesn't. Power doesn't. God does. Point 4. Thought a long time about how I wanted to wrap this up. Point number 4 is this. It is possible to turn around horrible decisions from the past. Not easy. Not fast. I know we can't create heaven on earth. Only the second coming of Jesus Christ our Lord, God the Son, is going to accomplish that. There'll be a new heaven and a new earth. And God has all the babies. I've preached on that before. There's a reason, a theological reason why God has all the babies. It's not just sentiment. Little fluffy cherubs with wings. But there's strong historic evidence that bad decisions can be reversed with prayer, clear thinking, sacrificial work. I began this message citing some of the terms of the Roe versus Wade decision in 1973. Particularly significant is the part, I read this, part of the ruling that says no state may make laws regulating abortion during the first 3 months of pregnancy. No state may make laws regulating abortion during the first 3 months of pregnancy. Remember that. No state may make laws regulating pregnancy during the first 3 months. I say remember it because I want to read to you another horrible piece of legislation. It comes from the same Supreme Court of the United States, only has a different date. It's dated March 6th, 1857. Piece of legislation called the Dred Scott versus Stanford decision. And it was ruled that no act of Congress or territorial legislature could create any laws banning slavery. Do you see the similarity? Roe versus Wade. No court may create any laws against abortion the first 3 months of pregnancy. The other, the Dred Scott versus Stanford. No act of Congress or territorial legislator should create any laws banning slavery. And notice the reason. It's highly relevant to today's abortion discussion. The reason given is slaves are not free and equal persons, but the property of their masters. Notice, the decision of the master determined the fate of the slave. The rights of the master to do what he wanted with his own property were counted as of higher value than the rights of the slave to be protected as a person. Do you see the similarity? The master has the voice, the master has the power, therefore his decision over the slave is ultimate. No law can protect. The right of the mother is ultimate in deciding the fate of the preborn child. No law shall be made against abortion during the first 3 months. So in other words, those with the voice and the power had greater rights and protection under the law than those who were weak and powerless and voiceless. But the whole moral vision of a nation, not even completely to this day, but in law, the moral vision of the nation was eventually turned around. People like Abraham Lincoln in America, William Wilberforce in England, they paid the high price to defend the powerless, the rights of those who couldn't speak for themselves. And that's exactly where we are today. I long for a day I will probably never see when people will look back on our abortion laws the way we now look back in horror and disgust on the laws defending and promoting slavery in Britain and North America. Any church or pastor that is silent on the death of 1.7 million helpless babies each year out of sheer political correctness or fear of not being seeker sensitive is totally abandoning the gospel of Jesus Christ. Close with some words from Proverbs. They're meant to be taken, first of all, as encouragement, not to give up the cause. It's not easy to stay dedicated and prayerful and vigilant over the long haul. Out of sight becomes out of mind. And when you don't think about abortion, you won't pray about abortion. Until you mourn for half an hour, you won't pray for half an hour. Here are the words, Proverbs 24:11 and 12. You know them probably. Rescue those who are being taken away to death. Hold back those who are stumbling to the slaughter. And if you say, behold, we didn't know this. This is the same argument Job uses. Does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who keeps watch over your soul know it? Will he not repay man according to his work? I referred to it earlier. I told you I'd bring it up again. Those two pastors told me they were personally pro-life, but knew it was no longer credible, acceptable to proclaim those views from the pulpit. If we do nothing else, keep it visible. Consider this. Collier's Pregnancy Center in Naples, Florida says 95% of women who come in and see their ultrasound choose not to abort their babies. 95% who come in and see their ultrasound choose not to abort their babies. And does that surprise anyone? Guess why Planned Parenthood by policy does not want expectant mothers to see their ultrasound. Wake up, everybody. Wake up. William Wilberforce fought for 40 years. My, how much we owe to people like that. Fought for 40 years to turn over the laws of Britain regarding the slave trade, and the laws were changed 2 days after he died. God bless people. God bless people with the vision to plant oak trees, tiny little oak trees, when they're never going to be around to see them grow. I hope you'll take some time every day and pray about this. Find causes you can fund. Stay informed. It's not here yet, but it's coming. There'll be a number of copies of this little book. I've not finished it. It was recommended to me, and I didn't get right through it. The Case for Life. It looks to me like a fabulous book. Scott Klusendorf, The Case for Life, Equipping Christians to Engage the Culture. We're going to get copies of this. They'll be in the resource room hopefully this week. They're not there yet. Don't go ask for it. But next Sunday, you should be able to get some copies of that.